Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. 8 months after the elections, what should we make of the second Modi government? 13 months after the abrogation of Articles 370 and 35A and the demotion of Kashmir to Union Territory status, what is the mood of the people in the valley? On Wednesday, the well-known historian and author Ramchandra Guha told me that the Gandhis must depart from politics immediately. They must separate immediately from the Congress party as well. Arvind, are you ready? Shuru karu? Yes. Ready? मैं अपना क्यों लूं? Hello and welcome to a special collection of interviews supported by Glenlivet Books. Now, 2020 has been a year absolutely no one wants to remember, and we all passionately hope will never come again. But the paradox is, during this year, we've actually done some pretty remarkable path-breaking interviews that have set the agenda, interviews that have opened our eyes to the future, interviews that have raised fundamental questions which sometimes the government has had to answer, but often has refused to do so. In terms of key issues, we've covered the pandemic itself, we've covered the collapse of the economy, and the great growing problem with China on the border with Ladakh. But it's not just issues that we've covered. We've also interviewed some fascinating personalities. Politicians like Farooq Abdullah, Shashi Tharoor, Mahua Moitra, authors like Chetan Bhagat, academics like Raghu Ram Rajan and Abhijit Banerjee. Take these interviews collectively and they shed a deep penetrating insight into the challenges we faced in 2020, and they also help answer the question, how adequate was our response? How successful was our attempt to combat the challenges we face? And so as we come to the end of a year that we all hope will never ever repeat itself again, these glimpses from those interviews will give you some sense of the horror we're saying bye-bye to, and a sense also of the joy that would happen when 2021 proves to be so different to the year we say bye-bye to. Enjoy these glimpses and keep your fingers crossed. We never have to live this horror again. You've seen the sort of Prime Minister he's been since 2014. You've often tweeted with disillusionment, sometimes with anguish, occasionally with anger, particularly in the days of CA and NPR.
Yes.
Do you regret the role you played in helping him become Prime Minister?
No.
You have no regrets at all?
No. You learn, you don't regret.
I suspect the expectations from the central government are so low that it barely comes up. The only time it came up was in conversations in Mustafabad when people pointed to the Trump visit and said, this is what our government was busy with while we were dying. And is that why they delayed deployment of forces? Why wasn't the army called in? These are the kinds of questions that people have asked. But I don't believe, Karan, and in all honesty, I don't think you do either, that there is an expectation that the central government will go there and stand with the people. But I did expect the Chief Minister, I did expect and hope that Arvind Kejriwal, Mr. Manish Sisodia, the Deputy CM, would go there as, this is their, they have moral, they should have exerted.
These are their voters, these are the people who brought them to power.
Just on a humanitarian basis, exert moral authority, stand there with people, have large, have sabhas, have armed sabhas at corners. You can handle so many sabhas in one day. Say, we stand with you, we will do whatever in our power to assuage your pain and to reassure you of your full citizenship in this country.
Building on this story, because it's a very important telling story, if you had been Commissioner of Police when Anurag Thakur conducted a rally where he made people say Goli Maro Sanoko, you would have had him arrested.
I would have had him arrested after informing the government.
And you would have done the same to Parvez Singh Barma and Kapil Mishra.
For that, no permission was required.
You would have done it immediately.
Yeah, a person who's an MLA, then only the speaker has to be informed that this man was committing this offence. We have registered a case and arrested him. That's all that is required.
And that doesn't even apply to Kapil Mishra.
Yes.
He's not an MLA.
So I am saying that if he was an MLA, that is the most. And a person who's not an MLA, nothing, there is no obstruction in arresting him.
Tell me, what would you have done about Ved Prakash Surya, the DCP Northeast, who stood beside Kapil Mishra when Kapil Mishra made his inflammatory statement and Mr. Surya did nothing? If you had been Commissioner of Police, what would you have done?
I would have called for his explanation immediately, that under what circumstances did you not take action or stop him from speaking further.
Let me ask you the opposite question. What are his big weaknesses?
Oh, I'm too small a person to talk about his weakness. It is for people to judge.
But as an analyst who's worked with him.
See, I've been asked this question, and probably if I'm forced to say something, I'd position it differently. I would say probably as an individual, as a leader, he could be a bit more benevolent.
How would you describe the mood of the Kashmiri people in the valley?
Well, to be honest, I wonder whether they'll find somebody who will call himself an Indian today. What they did, it was already difficult, but what they did on 5th of August last year was the last stone nail in the coffin of India. And that's what they did. You go and talk to anybody, they don't want to know. They're not Pakistanis, let me be very clear about it.
But they don't feel
But
Indian.
they don't feel Indian. And us who have to speak, I wonder whether we will survive.
When you say they don't feel Indian, does that also mean they don't want to be Indian?
Because they can no longer trust. The unity of the Muslim majority state with the rest of the nation was on trust. Here was Pakistan, a Muslim country, Islamic country. Easily for us to go that side. Religion that side, the roads that side, the rivers go that side. We went against the current
Because you had
joined the Gandhi's India, not Modi's India.
Gandhi's
India.
Because you had trust.
We had trust.
And that
The trust was that everyone in this nation will be equal.
Pakistan has been making demographic changes in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir by bringing in Punjabi settlers for decades. At the moment, no demographic changes happen. It's only made possible by the domicile law. And secondly, this is equally important. If you can change the administrative structure of Gilgit-Baltistan, India can certainly do the same in Jammu and Kashmir.
Yeah, Karan, I told you I'll come to Gilgit-Baltistan, but let me just finish this thought. You know, there are three levels. You know, I have a background in scholarship. There are three levels at which a state can operate in the International Community of Nations. There's the multilateral international, which is the UN. We know what India thinks of the UN resolutions. We know what India said about the plebiscite after going to the UN itself and then pulling back from it. The second level is bilateral. For years, for decades, since 1972, Shimla, India told the world it's a bilateral matter. We'll use Shimla. What happened on the 5th of August? A unilateral decision that Shimla explicitly says you cannot do. And don't take my words for it. Take A.G. Noorani's words. What did he say in a recent article? The foul deeds of August 5th destroy the Shimla Agreement or the Shimla Pact totally. And the third level is unilateral. You've done something unilateral. When you did something unilateral, you had to bring in 180,000 troops, lie to the world that there was a terrorist threat, and then you perpetrated, Indian government perpetrated terrorism on the 5th of August. And then a year later, you had to impose curfew. And when you say, Karan, that the wishes of the people don't matter, that's where you go wrong.
You began first of all by...
Congress under the Gandhis provides credible cover-up and excuse for the Modi government to explain away its failures. It was much worse under Congress, they say every time. Oh, Congress began the problem.
And everyone knows that it was not worse in the Congress time, that they are the ones who are going down a deep hole. And they keep saying, now they want to reopen in the Supreme Court, they want to go and reopen the internal emergency. 40 years later, 50 years later, they want to open up everything. Now, if they don't have enough confidence in what they have to offer to the country today, despite the miasma they created of religion, then it's just too sad for them.
All these were peaceful protests all across the country. I've traveled, in fact, to every place in the country, saying that this CAA is anti-constitutional. And it is our job, and I think it's my right, not only my right, my duty to defend the Indian Constitution. So, and these were all peaceful protests.
But at Jafrabad specifically, did you in any way seek to provoke or mobilize the crowd into what could be interpreted as rioting?
Of course not. It is ridiculous. On what basis are these charges being hurled? And this is the whole thing. They are orchestrating this whole issue of they are supposed to be investigating the communal violence in Delhi. 53 people died. Is there any charge sheet on any of these murders?
My analysis shows that they are taking up issues of trivial matters. National anthem. Karan Thapar must stand up in the movie hall. Everybody will have to stand up and there will be compulsory showing of singing of national anthem. And a person in a wheelchair is beaten up in Guwahati. The result of the Supreme Court judgment? When I say and I show that they have not taken up, they have shut their eyes to vital evidence in the Loya case. When I show and I say and I have said and written that they completely misrepresented what happened in open court in the Rafael case. Now, this is analysis. This is not my impression. I was present, I have analyzed. When I say that they threw the administration of Assam into chaos by their epileptic orders in regard to the CAA, on the question of who is Assamese and who is an Indian citizen or not, that is analysis. And by what the Supreme Court has done, they can certainly they can certainly say, as you just now pointed out, that my analysis is destroying people's faith in the institution and therefore it is contempt.
In your eyes, the hard right threatens the most important thing you believe India has to do, which is to grow, become rich, and to make poor Indians prosperous. The hard right threatens that.
Yes, they do. And I give that example. They are like that uncle in a marriage which gets drunk and starts misbehaving and comes near the groom and bride and starts saying crazy things and takes attention away from a beautiful pious ceremony. But you can't throw him out because he's paid for the wedding or part of the wedding. And so therefore the government can't tell the hard right, stop this, what are you doing? I'm sure the finance minister did not like that the Economist, instead of announcing that how her economic package for COVID recovery won in May, in October, in November, they are highlighting how certain right-wing elements bullied a jewelry brand. I'm sure she doesn't want this, but she can't really openly say it. Amit Shah did say it later on, that there was an overreaction. So I think that is also a signal that the government inside wants to keep this in check without coming across as attacking its own base.
Now, in contrast to what you're saying, let me read out newspaper headlines about Gogra and hot springs. First, Gogra. Pullback at Gogra, that's the Indian Express. Chinese army retreats in Ladakh's Gogra, that's the Hindustan Times. Now I'll come to hot springs. The withdrawal at hot springs is complete, NDTV. Both sides start pulling back in hot springs sector, Indian Express. And then this morning, the Economic Times today's has the following headline: Gogra position restored, big troop pullback at hot springs. Are you saying that these headlines from multiple newspapers are inaccurate? In fact, they are false, they are not true.
Absolutely, that's precisely what I'm saying. They are all getting their information from one source, that is the government's outlets that are disseminating information. There is very little verification on the ground going on. There are no cross checks that these newspapers are carrying out from local sources, and they are just reporting what the government is basically saying. So all of them, if you look at their sort of the wording of their reports, it all says government sources, and that's primarily where they're getting their information from. They have to cross-check, which they're not doing.
The opinion often expressed about this government is this compared to Indira Gandhi's emergency. Are there similarities there, or is that an unfair and exaggerated comparison?
So there are similarities and differences. One, actually, in some ways, this government is more insidious. It's more insidious because, at least with emergency, Indira Gandhi had to go through a formal protocol of declaring an emergency, right? There was a single point agenda in the emergency, which was to consolidate state power behind her and make sure that she wasn't sort of challenged by independent institutions. But what this government has, as I said, added on to that, right, is a much more ambitious project of communalization. So communalization plus authoritarianism is a far, far more insidious project.
One of the things that is pretty obvious is that the police are deliberately trying to connect the protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act, the protests against the National Register of Citizens, with the Delhi riots. How do you respond to this deliberate strategy of the police?
It is a complete orchestration. Because you see, the Delhi riots, what they call the riots, these are not really riots, it was communal violence. And this communal violence, as I said earlier, I mean now since we are discussing it, 53 people are officially dead. How many more unofficial, we wouldn't know. 53 people, I mean what is this, tell me a single charge sheet on any one of these murders. There were hate speeches that are widely publicized all over the country and the world by a union cabinet minister.
Anurag
Thakur, by Mr. Kapil Mishra, leader of the BJP in Delhi.
Parvesh Verma.
And these are all viral on the social media. And they're given dates. Till Trump is here, we won't do anything. The moment he leaves.
And nothing has happened against those people.
Nothing.
How do you respond to the claim made by the Solicitor General that you've brought the court into disrepute and that you were instigating people?
See, I also told my lawyers who came up in my defense, the important point for me was not to keep me out of jail or any punishment at the court. It was to establish that we have a right as citizens to respectfully disagree with our Supreme Court, which I did, which I do, and which is why I'm back in front of you to reiterate why I have disagreements with the court. Also, the other thing that I said was that there are some issues that are more important that cannot be resolved in a court of law. They have to be resolved by people, as I said, on the streets and in our hearts. Neither of those are statements that I feel should offend any court. And the third point that I wanted to make was assume that I was in the wrong. Does it mean that the Supreme Court is going to now check out the credentials of every petitioner before looking at the petition and say, only if you respect me will I listen to your petition?
Curfew, goon, lunacy, prepone and troll. Everyone knows their meaning.
Because of the stories behind them. So, everyone knows what a curfew is, of course, but no one knows how the term came about and that it was about covering a fire. Couvre-feu. People on prepone, I wanted to tell a slightly wry story against myself because, prepone only exists in Indian English. And I briefly thought that I had invented it because I first put the word in print in an article in the Junior Statesman in 71 or 72. And then in subsequent years, I kept noticing it popping up in Indian publications and magazines over the years after I'd left India. And I said, hey, the word has survived and caught on. So I rashly wrote a column asking whether anyone knew of an earlier usage, because otherwise I was going to take credit for it.
And there was one.
I promptly got a letter from the lady who runs the Oxford English Dictionary, no less, from Oxford, telling me that not only had I not invented it, she had a citation going back to the very beginning of the 20th century in America, and one from the early 1950s from India. So clearly, nothing new under the sun when it comes to lexicography, but I was pleased nonetheless to tell these stories and also use that as an opportunity for a slight side riff on Indian English.
Two things that I've been told about you. One, that you're perhaps one of the few rare MPs who's frequently brought cases to the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Do you have a fascination for litigation?
I don't have a fascination for litigation, but I have a fascination for getting justice. And there seems to be no other way of getting justice than going to the Supreme Court or going to the court, right?
You've done it at least 3-4 times.
I've definitely done it because, you know, when we are dealing with a government such as this, which try and do things, they break the law and they try and do things the back way, via the back door. There is no other reason why, there's no other
Now, over the last 50 days of the lockdown, it's become very apparent that there are actually gaping holes in the government's delivery system. A study done by professors at Yale University establishes that perhaps as many as 170 poor women don't have Jan Dhan accounts, so they are not getting the 500 rupees. Kabir Agarwal, writing for The Wire but relying upon food security data, says that 200 million people haven't got the additional 5 kilos of food grain. And the Indian Express says that only 25% of the additional dal has gone to beneficiaries. Now, these are things that the government must be aware of themselves, because they're in the papers, the researchers picked it up. Yet she hasn't done anything so far to plug these gaps. And that means that even her minimal relief is not getting to people, but she doesn't seem to be worried about it either.
Yes, in fact, if you look at the government's own data, only 11 million tons has been lifted, have actually been delivered under all of the NFSA and the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana from the beginning of April to yesterday.
How much should have been lifted?
Well, according to them, they gave about 24 million tons in April and 26 million tons in May.
So out
for
of
the
50 million tons over 2 months, 11 has been lifted.
It has been actually delivered to people.
Which means 25% of what should have been delivered has actually been delivered. And this is as per government's own data.
That's right. It's from their own websites.
Montek Ahluwalia, you write of the UPA decade. The performance of this government in the first 7 of its 10 years was outstanding. Give me 2 or 3 achievements that justify the use of that adjective, outstanding.
Well, I think the most important of those is really what happened to the growth rate. You know, over the years, the book covers much more than the UPA. We've been trying to get the economy from being slow growing to fast growing. And it is in the UPA years that for the first 7 years, we average a growth rate of 8.4%. This had never happened before, and it's never happened since. So that's the first one. Second, it wasn't just growth. We were very concerned that the growth needed to be inclusive. And that actually meant, A, doing a better job in agriculture, which actually we did. The agricultural performance in the UPA period was much better than the past and better than since. And second, a number of programs that were specifically aimed at improving incomes of the poor. And this is reflected in what happened to poverty. I mean, this is the first period when absolute poverty in India declined. And about 140 million people were pulled above the poverty line between 2004 and 2011.
And
that's
that
important.
figure of 138 million being pulled above the poverty line is an achievement that I believe was internationally recognized at the time. It had never happened before, and as you say, it hasn't happened since.
Yes, I mean, earlier the percentage of the population below the poverty line was going down, but the absolute number was increasing because population was expanding.
This is the first time the absolute number went down.
Yes, absolutely.
And it went down, as you write in your book, by 138 million.
Yes, that's the exact number.
Write history
What happened
as
in
quickly as is
2019 when you were shattered at the national level? You were reduced to 50 odd seats in Parliament.
Yes, I think it was deeply disappointing. It was deeply disappointing. But I believe the seeds of destruction of the present government lie in what they did in 2019.
You believe in the phoenix, do you? You'll rise from the ashes one day.
We will rise from the ashes, of course. And then if somebody says, well, he believes in the phoenix, he believes in a elitist bird, and that's the problem with the Congress, that's not the kind of discussion.
The phoenix is not an elitist bird, it's a mythical bird. It's a myth you believe in.
It does worry me because we've probably generated a lot of secondary infections amongst people who never got tested and therefore have not been quarantined in our practice.
And they're probably spreading it as well.
They are spreading it right now. They are spreading it right now. And so the virus is out there in the community. And I see, again, this is a question of, Karan, this comes down to, to put it quite bluntly, public communications in the time of a crisis such as this. And this is a kind of crisis which, frankly, this government and governments generally have not been really been tested with, and a lot of them have fumbled. The UK fumbled by saying...
Stick to India. Do you think that the Indian government is fumbling in its communication?
I think they're learning how to do this as they go along. I think the only way in
but
which...
But does that also mean they haven't got it right, is it?
Well, we're all learning, and I think the thing to learn here is that if you don't trust the citizenry with information and be straight with them on the number of cases, you cannot expect them to cooperate with you in the long term for things like social distancing.
If India is taking a stance that its actions of August 5th, a permanent change to the territory which is disputed, if India is arguing that a forced domicile law, change of demography of that territory is not against the UN Charter, well, India is then priding itself at being a rogue state, Karan. Let me tell you why. The UN Charter and the UN resolutions are very clear. India's never obeyed them. But now you have formally stated you're going to violate them. And let me also tell you, your foreign minister was very recently, I think last year perhaps, in the US. I heard him say that India will now resolve all its problems unilaterally.
At an individual level, I'm driven by whatever, and driven and fascinated by whatever I have learned or have been able to understand in my limited wisdom about Mr. Gandhi and what he has preached about how someone in public life should conduct himself or herself.
Mr. Gandhi, I take it, is the Mahatma.
Mahatma Gandhi, of course. And he said, the best politics is right action.
One of the things that is most remembered about the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, when we look back, is the fact that when he was asked by journalists why he was continuing with A. Raja when clearly the telecom scandal was happening, his answer was coalition dharma.
He's right.
But that's what I'm saying. He was therefore forced into a position where the authority of the Prime Minister was impinged upon and reduced because of coalition dharma. It made him look weak. It made him look as if he wasn't in control of who's in his cabinet, who serves or not. They don't serve at his will. He may want to get rid of them, but he can't, because coalition dharma means he has to keep people who are not right.
But that's you're cleverly putting it in a manner that would make him look weak.
That's how it seemed to the press.
But
that's how it was reported.
But the public and the press must recognize that when you have a coalition of different parties, the Prime Minister in that coalition cannot play the same role that he would if it was a single party government and if he was the head of the party. Now we know that. So that's a realistic appreciation that it is a different kind of situation. I don't think there's anything constitutionally wrong in it at all.
See, I think that this very specific question of the citizenship law goes to the heart of what we are as a country and what we chose to be. Because 100 years, and this is really a 100-year-old battle. It was 100 years ago that Mahatma Gandhi came to India, took leadership of the freedom struggle, and he led India in a direction that India, when it would be free, would be a country that belongs equally to all, regardless of their religious identity. It was 100 years ago that the Hindu Mahasabha, and then in 1925 the RSS was constituted. They have a different imagination, and I see this battle continuing right up to today. The point that I'm trying to make is that, again, during the time of the Constituent Assembly, I think there's something very beautiful that Jawaharlal Nehru said. When people asked, who will this country belong to, who have a right to this country, he said, everyone who chooses to make this their country, this country belongs to them. I mean, there is no other conditionality. And now we are going back, and the RSS and the BJP, the RSS, the Hindu Mahasabha always believed in that this was a country primarily of the Hindus.
Even if the BJP were to lose tomorrow, right, how are we going to stitch back together civil society, right, once this poison of communalism and authoritarianism has been injected in it?
Take care, stay safe.